Alice, Sweet Alice wasn't just a low-budget shocker. It was a slow, festering wound disguised as a Catholic melodrama. Nothing about it behaved the way a 1,970 seconds horror film was supposed to behave. The violence felt too intimate, the innocence felt too unstable, and the terror didn't come from monsters, but from the quiet certainty that something holy had begun to rot. Production troubles mounted, tempers snapped, and early screenings left audiences arguing whether the film was blasphemy or brilliance. Why did a story about a troubled girl ignite such disproportionate fury, and why did it refuse to die after being buried twice? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Alice, Sweet Alice. Fact 1. The mask in Alice. Sweet Alice wasn't created to terrify anyone. It was an improvised solution born from a collapsing budget, a compromise the filmmakers assumed would fade quietly into the background. Instead, it became the film's most haunting artifact. The crew had initially planned to commission a molded rubber piece capable of registering subtle expressions, but cost overruns forced them toward a flimsy, child-sized carnival mask that looked barely serviceable in daylight. What no one expected was how violently the mask reacted to tungsten lighting. Under the hot lamps, its cheap plastic softened just enough to warp, bending the contours of the face into a distorted half-smile that seemed to quiver with every breath. Actors complained that they couldn't tell where the masked performer was looking. The empty eye holes swallowed light rather than reflecting it, creating the illusion of a gaze that hovered somewhere behind the mask rather than inside it. The cinematographer noticed something stranger. Sometimes, before the actor even stepped into frame, the mask would flare slightly in the viewfinder, catching glints that shouldn't have existed in the room. The effect sparked arguments about whether it was a lens flaw, a lighting anomaly, or something more psychological, a trick of dread amplified by long shooting days in enclosed spaces. The director rewrote scenes to exploit this accidental menace, framing the mask as an embodiment of innocence curdled into something unrecognizable. Even after the shoot wrapped, crew members hated opening the prop trunk where it was stored. The mask always seemed to lean forward, reflecting stray light as though acknowledging whoever disturbed it. No one set out to craft a horror icon. The mask simply refused to be anything else. Fact 2. The church that became the film's spiritual and visual backbone wasn't chosen for symbolism, but for survival. The production simply couldn't afford multiple interior locations, and most parishes refused outright once they learned the story involved a child, murder, and Catholic ritual. One struggling church, however, agreed not out of enthusiasm but necessity. Because the rental fee covered a month of overdue utilities, the filmmakers expected a quiet, functional space. What they found was a building with an unnerving acoustic personality. Every footstep on the marble floor reverberated like an accusation. Every whisper inside the confession booth seemed to return altered, as if the dark wood absorbed one meaning and exhaled another. The stained glass windows, which the cinematographer first viewed as decorative constraints, changed temperament throughout the day, gentle during morning mass, but fractured and sinister by late afternoon when the sun tilted low. Crew members swore the colors shifted even when the weather didn't, turning scenes unexpectedly ominous. Parishioners grew suspicious. Some complained that the props, ropes, wax heads, imitation knives were disrespectful. Others insisted the film mocked Catholic imagery, especially after a visiting priest declared the set spiritually compromised. The director, who hadn't planned any overt commentary on religion, suddenly found himself shaping scenes around an atmosphere that seemed to impose itself. Even the actors felt it. They described moments where the church felt oppressively watchful, as though the walls disapproved of what was being filmed. Ironically, the film's most enduring critique, that it weaponizes sacred space, emerged from a location chosen only because it was cheap. Nothing in the script demanded the church feel malevolent. The building simply volunteered. Fact 3. Brooke Shields' small role in Alice, Sweet Alice, has been inflated so dramatically by history that many viewers forget she appears for only minutes. Her casting wasn't part of any grand plan. She lived near the shooting location, and her mother thought the project would offer modest exposure without disrupting school. No one foresaw what would happen once Shields became a national sensation. Years later, distributors sensed opportunity. They re-released the film under new titles, redesigned posters to feature her prominently, and pushed marketing campaigns suggesting she was central to the story. Audiences walked into theaters expecting a Brooke Shields vehicle and instead encountered a bleak psychological Thriller, where she dies almost immediately. That mismatch created a strange ripple effect. Many swore they remembered her surviving longer or appearing in scenes she was never in, a collective misremembering that eerily mirrored the film's themes of distorted perception. The director was furious, insisting the re-releases cheapened the film's psychological ambitions. But the damage and the cult appeal was done. The more Shields' fame grew, the more the movie mutated around her absence, becoming a kind of cinematic optical illusion, a story people believed they remembered but never actually saw. In the end, Shields didn't just act in the film, she accidentally haunted it. Fact 4. The knife used throughout Alice. Sweet Alice wasn't selected for brutality. It was chosen because it looked dull on camera, a harmless prop that seemed incapable of alarming anyone. Yet, under certain lighting setups, the blade reflected a sharp, needle-thin glint that appeared far more lethal than anything the crew anticipated. This posed an unexpected problem. Scenes meant to evoke tension began to look genuinely dangerous. Actors grew uneasy, insisting the blade seemed to shift shape depending on who held it, sometimes appearing longer or more tapered in playback footage. The prop master confirmed the knife had been swapped with identical replicas multiple times during production. Not for continuity, but because the original kept disappearing from the storage table, no one admitted moving it. The director initially suspected crew pranks, but the phenomenon persisted even after the props were locked up overnight. In one instance, the knife reappeared on a pew inside the church, placed almost ceremonially, as if inviting yet another scene. The cinematographer leaned into these eerie inconsistencies, adjusting compositions to exaggerate the knife's unpredictable presence, but the actor's unease deepened. Several described a bizarre sensation while holding it, as though the weight shifted mid-scene, becoming too light to feel or too heavy to ignore. Though the blade was blunt, the dread it produced was not. By the time filming wrapped, the knife had become more than a prop. It was a recurring intrusion, slipping in and out of the film as casually as a thought one cannot suppress. In a movie obsessed with the blurred lines between innocence and violence, the knife didn't symbolize danger, it behaved like it understood it. Fact 5. The film's oppressive atmosphere wasn't solely the result of lighting or set design. Much of it stemmed from a malfunctioning smoke machine that the crew struggled to control. Intended to produce soft, drifting haze for church interiors, it instead belched erratic bursts of dense fog that filled rooms unevenly, sometimes obscuring actors completely, and other times vanishing the moment the camera rolled. The inconsistencies frustrated the lighting team, whose meticulously prepared setups dissolved into murky chaos. But something strange happened as production continued. The unpredictable haze began shaping the tone of entire scenes. Moments intended to feel grounded became dreamlike. Characters seemed to fade into their surroundings as if being absorbed by the story's paranoia. In the confession booth sequences, the machine clogged and released smoke in jagged pulses that recorded on film as trembling shadows, making the booth appear to breathe. Crew members described feeling disoriented after long takes, as though the fog altered their sense of distance and time. Despite attempts to repair the device, it continued malfunctioning, almost choosing which scenes deserved its presence. Eventually, the director stopped fighting it, allowing the haze to dictate visual rhythm and emotional tension. Although the final film's atmosphere feels deliberately crafted, its most haunting visual signatures came from a machine no one trusted, a device whose failings conjured a mood more unsettling than anything planned. The smoke machine didn't merely malfunction, it imposed its will. Fact 6. The casting of Paula E. Shepherd, who played Alice despite being 19 years old, was not a stylistic gamble but a practical decision rooted in scheduling nightmares. The production required a child actor with long shooting availability, something nearly impossible given local school regulations. Shepherd, small in stature and capable of shifting between vulnerability and hostility, seemed like an improbable solution, a young adult who could convincingly embody a conflicted 12-year-old without violating labor laws. Yet her performance introduced an unexpected psychological tension. Crew members described feeling unsettled during close-ups because Shepherd's emotional intensity didn't match her physical age. She delivered lines with a maturity that made the character's cruelty feel disturbingly intentional rather than childish. This blurred boundary deepened the film's ambiguity. Audiences couldn't decide whether Alice was misunderstood, manipulative, or merely a projection of adult fear. Even more strangely, Shepard admitted in interviews that she never fully connected with the characters' motivations, instead relying on instinct and discomfort emotions that seemed to radiate into the scenes around her. The result was a protagonist who felt both too old for her world and too young for her rage, an uncanny presence that grounded the film's emotional violence in something more tragic than monstrous. In the end, Shepard didn't just play Alice. She introduced a version of childhood no one could look at directly. Fact 7. The film's sound design, often praised for its jagged unease, wasn't crafted through deliberate experimentation, but emerged from a series of technical failures the crew never fully understood. The production relied on a rented Nagra recorder already notorious for inconsistent pitch drift, a flaw that caused dialogue to waver slightly during playback. At first, the editor panicked. Children's voices sounded warped, adult lines bent upward unpredictably, and ambient noises cracked at random intervals. Yet, when the director listened closely, he found the distortions strangely fitting, as if the world of the film were speaking with a nervous tremor. Layering footsteps over the malfunction amplified this effect. The recorder produced a faint doubling that made each step sound like two people walking in hesitant unison. Doors closing echoed too long, creating a sense that something unseen followed the actors through hallways. Even the breaths captured in close-up scenes seemed mismatched to the characters, giving the film an uncanny rhythm that blurred emotional boundaries. Attempts to repair the equipment only made the problem more inconsistent. Some days the audio behaved normally, other days it pitched entire scenes into queasy, unstable tones that felt like auditory hallucinations. Instead of reshooting, the director embraced the chaos, weaving the flawed audio into the film's architecture of anxiety. The final mix preserved many of these abnormalities. Though no one outside the crew knew their origin, what critics later praised as bold psychological soundscaping was, in truth, an accumulation of errors that refused to stay hidden. The recorder didn't malfunction by accident, it set the film's heartbeat. Fact 8. The rain scenes in Alice. Sweet Alice feel meticulously orchestrated, but the production never intended to shoot in storms at all. They had planned for clear weather, counting on natural light to soften the film's harsher tones. But the region was struck by an unexpected sequence of autumn squalls that repeatedly disrupted outdoor shooting schedules. With no budget for artificial rain towers or lighting tents, the crew resorted to improvisation. They filmed through real storms, shielding equipment with tarps held by trembling grips who stood ankle-deep in runoff. The unpredictable downpours transformed simple dialogue scenes into fraught tableau. Water streaked across lenses, street reflections fractured the characters' silhouettes, and gusts of wind distorted umbrellas into menacing shapes. Actors shivered so violently between takes that their on-camera tension appeared entirely in character. Even more remarkable, the rain altered the film's thematic texture. Scenes meant to feel mundane acquired the weight of emotional turbulence. Puddles became mirrors of fractured identity, and backlit sheets of water resembled curtains, separating innocence from guilt. Yet, the crew often remembered these sequences with dread, recalling the fear that electrical equipment might short out or that props would simply float away. Despite these hazards, the storms offered something impossible to fabricate, a sense of inevitability, as though the weather itself condemned the characters. By the end of production, rain had reshaped the entire visual strategy. What was meant to be a grounded thriller became a drenched fever dream. The storms didn't interrupt the film, they authored it. Fact 9. The film's editing pace, with its abrupt cuts and lingering pauses, wasn't the product of artistic intention, but of a logistical disaster that forced the editor to rethink every scene. Midway through post-production, several reels went missing during transport between facilities. No one could determine whether they were lost, mislabeled, or accidentally stored with unrelated projects. With deadlines tightening, the editor pieced together sequences from alternate takes, partial trims, and discarded snippets never meant to appear on screen. This limitation created a fractured rhythm. Characters exited frames without reappearing where expected. Emotional beats truncated suddenly, and transitional shots disappeared entirely. Yet, within this fragmentation, the editor discovered an accidental psychological language. The disjointed structure mirrored the characters' suspicions and misinterpretations, making the narrative feel more claustrophobic than the script intended. Some scenes gained power because they lacked connective tissue. The audience was forced to fill in emotional gaps, often imagining something darker than what was filmed. When the missing reels finally turned up near the end of post-production, the director reviewed them but refused to reinsert most of their material. The jagged pacing had become integral to the film's identity. Viewers later interpreted the editing style as deliberate tension crafting, unaware it emerged from desperation rather than design. In its own way, the lost footage became ghost scenes, shaping the film precisely by not appearing in it. Fact 10. The yellow raincoat worn throughout Alice, Sweet Alice, became one of the film's most striking images. Yet the wardrobe choice wasn't born from symbolism, it came from a miscommunication between departments that no one realized until filming had already begun. The costume designer had selected a muted brown coat meant to blend into the film's bleak environment, while the director envisioned something brighter but still subdued. What arrived on set was neither. A vivid, almost acidic yellow slicker that reflected light like polished enamel. The cinematographer was horrified at first. The coat overpowered every frame, pulling attention away from characters' faces and warping the exposure of interior shots. But something happened the moment the coat was filmed in motion. Its unnatural brightness carved a path through dark alleys and shadowed hallways, transforming the character into a moving omen. Extras on set described feeling chilled watching the silhouette drift through fog, as if the coat announced violence before any action occurred. The director quickly realized the mistake had gifted the film an accidental emblem, innocence turned radioactive. He rewrote blocking to ensure the coat appeared in reflections, doorway slits, and peripheral corners, where viewers would register its presence without fully seeing the wearer. Audiences later interpreted the yellow as a thematic statement, corruption hidden beneath childhood. Iconography, unaware that the entire effect stemmed from a shipping error and a rush order delivered to the wrong address. The coat wasn't chosen to symbolize danger, it simply refused to blend into the world, insisting on revealing everything the film tried to hide. Fact 11. The film's most unsettling screams didn't come from actors at all, but from a strange acoustic fluke discovered in the basement of the production office. While scouting for ADR locations, the sound team tested the basement's concrete corridors and found an eerie resonance. Soft whispers bounced back, elongated, while louder vocalizations thinned into piercing tones that sounded nothing like the original voice. The effect fascinated the director, who insisted on recording several ambient sessions there. But the basement's atmosphere became increasingly oppressive. Crew members complained of headaches, disorientation, and the unnerving sensation that someone else was breathing beside them. During one session, a microphone captured a faint, high-pitched wail, even though no one had spoken for several seconds. Engineers tried to attribute it to interference or feedback, but the sound reappeared intermittently, always slightly different in tone, never traceable to a human source. Rather than discard the recordings, the director layered these spectral noises under key sequences, most notably in scenes depicting panic or confusion. Audiences later praised the film for its psychological realism, unaware that many of the sounds weren't crafted intentionally but emerged from a space that seemed to warp voices according to its own temperament. The basement didn't just echo the film's agony, it contributed a voice of its own. Fact 12. The film's marketing campaign collapsed so catastrophically that distributors believed the project was doomed until an unlikely champion reshaped its fate, a small independent theater owner in New Jersey who refused to let the movie die. After a disastrous initial release marked by mismatched posters, confused messaging, and poor scheduling, Sweet Alice vanished from most theaters within days, but this particular owner saw potential in the film's grim ambiance and barbed commentary on suburban fear. He began screening it during late-night slots, pairing it with offbeat cult features to build an audience willing to engage with its slow-burn menace. Word spread through local college groups, and soon viewers lined up for midnight showings, debating theories about the mask, the religious subtext, and the ambiguous morality of its characters. What the distributors considered a failure became a regional phenomenon. This grassroots revival forced the studio to reconsider the film's viability, leading to multiple re-releases and a broader cult reputation that endured for decades. Ironically, the film's legacy didn't begin with a studio push or a critical endorsement. It began in a dim theater lobby with hand-drawn flyers and a stubborn belief from a single exhibitor who sensed the audience before the audience knew itself. The movie wasn't rescued by marketing. It was resurrected by obsession. Fact 13. The film's grim realism owes much to a camera operator who developed an unintentional signature, a subtle, almost imperceptible sway caused by an old shoulder rig that never sat quite level. The production couldn't afford repairs, so the operator compensated manually, adjusting his breathing and posture with each movement. What emerged was an organic, unstable rhythm shots that felt as though the world itself pulsed under the weight of unspoken tension. Characters seemed watched, not by the camera, but by something unsettled behind it. During chase sequences, the sway intensified, making hallways appear to bend, compress, and stretch as if space were reacting to panic. Actors initially found the effect disorienting, claiming they felt followed even after the camera stopped rolling. The director, reviewing dailies, recognized the accidental brilliance in these imperfect movements and instructed the operator to maintain them intentionally. Soon, the film's visual language revolved around that quiver of instability. Even static shots felt alive, vibrating with suspicion. When critics later praised the film's documentary-like intrusion, no one realized the sway stemmed from worn padding, loose bolts, and a rig repaired with electrical tape. The camera wasn't merely capturing paranoia, it was physically expressing it. Fact 14. The production's most emotionally charged scenes were shaped not by rehearsal, but by exhaustion born from a scheduling crisis that left the cast filming far into the night. A series of location conflicts forced the crew into unpredictable hours, often beginning after midnight when the surrounding neighborhood fell silent. Fatigue blurred the edges between performance and genuine irritation. Actors snapped at one another, forgot lines, or delivered them with a raw frustration that proved more compelling than anything scripted. The director, instead of pushing for polished takes, embraced the tension, allowing the characters' emotional fraying to mirror the film's spiraling sense of dread. In one pivotal confrontation, the actress playing Catherine delivered a shaky, tear-strained monologue that wasn't in the script she had just learned. The scene would require multiple reshoots. Her outburst was so visceral the crew hesitated to cut, unsure if they were witnessing performance or collapse. The final edit preserved every trembling syllable. Critics later praised the film's hyper-realistic intensity, attributing it to sophisticated direction, but those who worked on set remembered differently. The movie's emotional core emerged not from control, but from the collapse of control. The story didn't drain the actors, the production did. Fact 15. The film's most iconic hallway shot, a long, breathless glide toward a half-open door, was never planned. The crew intended a simple static frame, but a dolly malfunction created a movement no one anticipated. The track's central joint had warped, causing the dolly to drift forward on its own weight whenever released. During a rehearsal, it rolled several feet toward the door with eerie smoothness, as though pulled by an unseen force. The operator lunged to stop it, but the director called out to keep rolling. Something about the autonomous motion felt right, predatory, calm, inevitable. They repeated the accident deliberately, adjusting lighting so the drifting camera mimicked the perspective of something stalking the characters. Actors felt a chill when reviewing the playback. The shot carried an intelligence the equipment shouldn't possess, a quiet decision-making that seemed outside human influence. The dolly was later repaired, but the magic evaporated. It moved correctly, and therefore moved less interestingly. The final shot remained a one-take anomaly, a technological slip transformed into a psychological signature. The equipment didn't break the scene, it discovered it. Fact 16. The film's most haunting close-ups were born from a lens the crew believed was defective. Early in production, the cinematographer noticed that the 35mm prime created a faint halo around subjects' faces whenever the light hit at a specific angle. The effect softened edges in a way that felt almost dreamlike inappropriate for a thriller built on paranoia. He planned to replace the lens, but no backup was available that day, and the director insisted on shooting regardless of the flaw. When they reviewed the footage, the halo read not as softness, but as a subtle atmospheric distortion, making characters appear isolated within their own emotional climates. The light wrapped around them like an invisible pressure, heightening the oppressive tone that defined the film's psychological landscape. Actors were startled by how their expressions transformed. Moments that felt ordinary during filming carried a trembling vulnerability in playback, as though the characters were caught in an unspoken internal conflict. Crew members suggested cleaning the glass, but the cinematographer noticed the effect vanished when he did, and returned only when the lens was left imperfect. He began experimenting, deliberately allowing micro smudges and residue to remain, crafting a visual tension that stemmed not from clarity but from carefully curated distortion. Audiences later described the film's close-ups as suffocating, intimate, and spiritually bruised. They never knew the secret. The lens didn't reveal the characters' emotions, it revealed their fractures. Fact 17. The film's unsettling score, with its shrill strings and mournful organ swells, wasn't composed in a studio, but assembled from discarded experimentation tapes the composer had abandoned years earlier. When the production approached him, he lacked the time and budget to craft an entirely new soundtrack. Instead, he revisited a box of old reel-to-reels, fragments of half-finished ideas, mistakes, and tonal exercises that never found purpose. As he played through them, he noticed certain pieces carried a disquieting fragility, as though the music were unsure of itself. Those imperfections matched the film's spiritual malaise, so he began stitching them together into a patchwork score. But something eerie happened as he worked. The tapes suffered unpredictable warping from age, causing notes to bend and stretch in unnatural ways. Rather than correct these distortions, he embraced them, layering pitch-shifted fragments with trembling organ drones that he recorded in a church basement for resonance. The resulting soundtrack felt simultaneously sacred and corrupted, echoing the story's themes more accurately than he could have planned. Audiences later praised the film for its bold sonic identity, unaware that much of the score originated from forgotten scraps resurrected out of necessity. The music didn't accompany the film's decay, it remembered it. Fact 18. The film's most chaotic confrontation sequence gained its visceral power not through choreography but through a misunderstanding that nearly shut down production. During a tense kitchen scene, two actors misinterpreted their blocking cues, resulting in a collision that sent props scattering and created an unscripted cascade of broken glass. The startled reactions captured on film weren't rehearsed, they were immediate, instinctive responses to chaos. Rather than cut, the director urged the actors to continue, allowing adrenaline to dictate the scene's emotional momentum. Their movements became jagged, unpredictable, fueled by confusion and genuine fear of stepping on shards. Crew members watched in alarm, convinced injuries were imminent. But when they reviewed the footage, the sequence carried a raw authenticity that surpassed anything their carefully planned choreography could achieve. The director incorporated the accident into the narrative, restructuring the edit to emphasize the spontaneity and disorientation. Ironically, the studio's insurance representative, who visited set days later, cited the incident as evidence of unsafe working conditions. Tension rose between the crew and the production office, but the scene remained untouched. Critics would later interpret its frantic energy as intentional commentary on the film's domestic volatility. In truth, the sequence wasn't meticulously crafted, it erupted, and the story reshaped itself around the eruption. Fact 19. The film's most enigmatic supporting performance came from an actor who reportedly refused to read the script in full, claiming he wanted his character's confusion to mirror the audience's. Initially, the director saw this as pretentious defiance, but the actor insisted he would only study the scenes he appeared in and ignore the rest of the narrative entirely. As a result, his on-screen demeanor, bewildered, reactive, slightly out of sync with the emotional tone around him, wasn't crafted deliberately, but emerged from genuine lack of context. He often asked questions between takes that stunned the crew. Is my character supposed to trust her? Are we inside a church or a school? Why is everyone whispering rather than correct him? The director discovered that this disorientation amplified the film's atmosphere of fractured perception. The actor's uncertainty created pockets of tension in scenes that were otherwise straightforward, injecting an uneasy unpredictability into mundane exchanges. In one instance, he delivered a line with such misplaced suspicion that the director rewrote subsequent scenes to accommodate the new emotional undercurrent. What began as a protest against traditional preparation evolved into a performance that critics later described as hauntingly dislocated. Ironically, the actor later admitted he eventually read the script years after the film's release and was stunned to discover how closely his accidental instincts aligned with the story's psychological architecture. He didn't understand the film while making it, but his confusion became one of its sharpest tools. Fact 20. The movie's climactic church sequence, remembered for its suffocating dread, was completed under circumstances so turbulent that the crew believed the production might collapse before the camera rolled. The church had double-booked the space, and a funeral unexpectedly overlapped with the scheduled shoot. Forced to wait outside in near silence, the cast and crew listened to muffled hymns and eulogies while preparing for a scene steeped in betrayal and violence. The emotional dissonance rattled everyone. When they finally entered the church hours later, the air still carried traces of incense and grief, creating a solemn heaviness that no artificial atmosphere could replicate. Actors reported feeling spiritually intruded upon, as though they were trespassing on private sorrow. This tension bled into the performances. Movements became slower, breath more fragile, glances more weighted. Even the camera seemed to drift with reverence, capturing shadows that seemed darker than before. A lighting failure added to the unease. One of the key rigs flickered unpredictably, forcing the cinematographer to rely on whatever illumination remained. The resulting imagery, dim, trembling, almost penitent, became central to the film's emotional climax. Critics later argued the scene felt haunted, unaware that its power emerged from a collision of grief, pressure, and failing equipment. The moment wasn't crafted through design, it was inherited. Bonus fact: long after Sweet Alice finished its turbulent production, a rumor began circulating among crew members about a roll of film no one remembered shooting a reel that appeared without label, slate, or production log. It surfaced during the final stages of editing, tucked at the bottom of a storage box meant for unused trims. When the editor threaded it through the Steenbeck, he expected test footage or camera calibration shots. Instead, the reel contained fragments of scenes that felt eerily adjacent to the story, yet belonged to no draft of the script. Shadows moved across hallways with no actors visible. A child's silhouette lingered at the edge of a frame, then vanished before stepping into the light. Reflections appeared in mirrors where no one had been positioned. And in one disquieting segment, the yellow raincoat drifted through a room without any identifiable figure inside it. The footage carried no sound, only the soft mechanical scrape of the projector, making every silent movement feel like a withheld confession. No one on the crew claimed responsibility for shooting the material, and the cinematographer insisted the angles didn't match any of his setups. Some speculated the reel was a composite of accidental exposures or improperly cleared film stock. Others whispered that a second unit, one never formally assigned, had wandered the set, capturing images between takes. The director watched the footage repeatedly, torn between fascination and unease. The images felt too intentional to be errors, yet too chaotic to be deliberate. Ultimately, the reel was never used. It vanished during the film's distribution shuffle, becoming a quiet legend among those who had glimpsed its contents. Decades later, scholars still debate whether the reel truly existed or whether memory, like the film itself, simply invented the shadows it needed. The missing footage didn't expand the story, it deepened its silence. Sweet Alice leaves behind a trail of questions that refuses to settle. A film built on distortions, accidents, and the eerie conviction that nothing shown on screen is ever the whole truth. Every prop, every sound, every shadow seems to carry a second meaning waiting to be argued over. So now it's your turn. Which detail felt intentional to you, and which seemed like pure chaos the film learned how to use? Tell us in the comments which moment altered the way you see this story, and what forgotten film you want us to unearth next.